combines global academic excellence with deep Indian grounding. Much like Mr. A.K. Sen, whose life and legacy we honor today, Dr. Singhvi embodies the ideal of lawyer-statesman, combining the intellectual rigor with a profound sense of public duty. Their connection is not merely philosophical but also historical. Dr. Singhvi's father, Dr. L.M. Singhvi, India's former High Commissioner to the UK and a distinguished jurist himself, worked closely with Mr. Sen during his formative years of India's post-independence legal framework. As one eminent jurist once described Dr. Singhvi, he is that rare mind where reasons meet rhetoric and conviction meets civility. With that, it is my privilege to invite Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi to share his reflection on Mr. Ashok K. Sen.
Honorable Justice. Honorable Justice Vikram Nath, Honorable Justice Bagchi, my dear old friend, Mr. Jayanto Mitra, a generation apart but an old friend, whose son-in-law I met afterwards, Sanjeev, distinguished sitting judges of the Supreme Court and the High Courts, not only Delhi but elsewhere, including travelers of the High Court from Bengal to Andhra Pradesh, former judges of the Supreme Court, former judges of the High Court, distinguished members of this very distinguished legal fraternity, ladies and gentlemen. You know, there's very little which can make a lawyer, a spokesperson, a politician speechless. Sanjeev Sen was hatching a conspiracy to deliberately make me speechless. And it's not fair, having invited me. But having said that, I must repeat my oft-quoted favorite anecdote about a bishop who likewise invited a speaker, as Sanjeev has me. And he introduced, as Sanjeev has, his speaker in very glowing terms. Undeserved, but very glowing terms. When it came to the turn of the speaker, as it has come to my turn now to speak, the speaker began with 2 forgivenesses. He said, I must first seek forgiveness for Sanjeev Sen for clearly having exceeded the bounds of truth. But then he said, I must seek forgiveness for myself as well for having enjoyed it so much. Justice Nath will do the heavy lifting shortly in the memorial lecture. We have got away with some anecdotal accounts. And since Ashok Sen was 20 years older than my father, and I am 28 years younger than my father, so there was a gap of 48 years. So it was beyond generations. But I knew him surprisingly well because of his connections with my father. So what I will do is, I will relate to you some of the anecdotes about the 2 of them, and even more importantly about the era in which they lived. And that's what I really miss. That era, that time period in our professions is something very interesting. Now everybody knows that he was India's longest serving law minister. He spanned generations of prime ministers from Nehru to Rajiv Gandhi. He came from a distinguished family, a very distinguished family. Sukumar Sen was the first CEC, and his nephew is Amartya Sen. Lesser people know that he spent 35 long years in Parliament, 6 of them in the Rajya Sabha. And he actually, and he told me this himself towards the end of his life, that he was always interested in academics, because I had started being an academic when I was doing my PhD. So he said that I published my first book on commercial law at the age of 26. And he was teaching when he had started practice for some time. But soon, the exigencies of law made him the top lawyer in the Calcutta High Court and in the Supreme Court for decades. But as I said, let me recount to you 4 or 5 anecdotes, not about only the man and his connection with my father, from whom I learned some of this, but also about the era and the times they lived in. The first relates to 1963, when in Parliament as Law Minister. It was now, at that time, common knowledge. Many of you may not know it. Even perhaps Justice Vikramnath and Justice Bakshi may not know it. Ashok Sen, by then, had wanted the offices of the Law Minister and Attorney General to be combined. There was a phase in his life when he was very keen that both the offices should be combined. So a debate happened in the Lok Sabha, where my father was a 30-year-old member of Parliament. In 62 he was elected. Where Ashok Sen, where it was quoted that the Law Ministry spokesperson on 3rd of January 1963 said, official spokesperson said officially, that look, the Law Minister advised the Cabinet on 24,250 cases in 1960. The Attorney General, who at that time was the very witty Mr. C.K. Daftari, that statement of the press said, he advised only in 34, as against 24,250. In 61, that figure was 20,000 by the Law Minister and 20 by the Attorney General. And in 62, it was 19,181 by the Law Minister and 11 by the AG. It didn't say more, it stopped there, but there was a clear indication. It was also added in that statement that the Attorney General should not be allowed any private practice. I'm sorry I didn't take the name of the Attorney General here. I'm very sorry, I completely missed you, but I should have said Attorney General for India. He doesn't do any private practice anyway. So this was the statement. This came up in Parliament. My father vigorously opposed the stand of the Law Minister and a Law Ministry whose spokesperson has said this, and he said this is a great attack and assault on the independence, etc., and the two offices should be separate. He was pretty trenchant in his criticism of Ashok Sen. In 62, when my father, nobody expected him to win in Lok Sabha, he won. And when nobody expected him to lose, he lost in 67. So this is the truth. In 67, he had 1 lakh rupees in his bank balance because he was a serious parliamentarian, unlike some of us. And he hardly practiced law from 62 to 67. And he started serious practice only after 67. The most important consideration in our family at that time was to retain the house for some time till you could get a proper house. We were living in 20 Mahadev Road. Suddenly, out of the blue in 67, there was a notification by the Law Minister, Mr. Ashok Sen, appointing a high-powered committee under the chairmanship of Dr. L.M. Singhvi. He never asked him, he never telephoned him. Later on, much later, he told my father, he said, I know you'll make it good in the profession and you needed a bridging gap, and this is anyway an important issue to be decided, so I thought I'll appoint you a committee. They had not been close before that, and he had in fact spoken against him. But thereafter, they fought 6 elections of the SCBA together, against each other. 6 elections. My father won 4, Ashok Sen won 2. But they would always stand at the edge of the corridor, where if you go on one side you had the canteen and the other side you have now the consultation rooms. They would stand together. It was a smaller bar then. People would walk up to them, say hello to both of them, and then each would go and vote for one or the other. Within hours, the first call would be LM, congratulations, Ashok, congratulations. And this is the truth, he swore to my father that he always voted for him. He actually swore. I'm telling you an era, a period which I've seen with my own eyes. Ashok Das' passions in life, possibly in that order, were power. He was very fond of political power, deservedly so. Followed by law, and followed by Singhada, the Bengali name for samosa. So Kajal Di, who's his wife, good friend of my mother's, would telephone my mother and say that in the SCBA meetings, even till today, Vikas will bear it out, samosas are served regularly. So when he would be the president, frequently Ashok Sen was the executive member, senior member, or vice versa. So when Ashok Sen was presiding, and my father was the executive committee member, he would raise the topic on some other topic, and then slowly say, LM, just move that little bit here, move that here. Kajal Di would telephone my mother to say that you must instruct your husband to ensure that no plate of samosa reaches him. Bhaumik would hover in the background, but he would not be very interventionist, but my father made sure that he removed the samosa plate to a very safe distance. I think about 6 months or a year before his death, I don't remember, I had become a young senior, and there was a joint conference organized in Shawwalla's matter, where he was to appear in the Chief's Court in Delhi High Court. And I obviously went to his house. He was not very well, and he used to have a leg massage done with oil. His blood circulation was also a little poor. We had a conference. In the middle of that, he said, Abhishek, you look up that Privy Council on this point. He didn't remember many of the recent cases, but he remembered the old ones. After the conference, I looked it up. It was bang on the point. So I asked him later, I said, how on earth do you think of this? So he said, look, right through my law ministership, I never stopped subscribing to the law library. And I would actually, people will not believe it, when I had time, read the law reports. Because he was absent from the law for many decades. And that's why he had also the best library in the country, and also a great memory to pinpoint the old cases. Friends, it's always important to be candid. Bhaumik was his pillar, but he was also his nemesis. Later years, Bhaumik brought him disrepute. It is not entirely untrue that because of Bhaumik, in his later years, at the last minute from the parking lot, he would be diverted from court X to court Y, underprepared and for a higher fee. But that I can tell you is largely Bhaumik. Ashok Sen was an intuitive lawyer. If he was asleep, unattentive, and you suddenly woke him up and asked him a question, intuitively he'd give the correct conceptual answer. His fundamentals of the law was so good and so intuitive. A lot of the things we today treat as common, a lot of the seminal principles of jurisprudence we treat as common, it was Ashok Sen who established them as a leading lawyer. Prithvi Cotton Mills, which establishes how there cannot be a legislative nullification of a judgment, but that the legislature must strive to remove the basis of the judgment, was largely in the Constitution bench argued by Ashok Sen. Krepak was path-breaking. Krepak was the Ridge and Baldwin of India, where all this distinction, nowadays it's common, the quasi-judicial, administrative, cobwebs about natural justice were removed, all Ashok Sen in 1970. Royappa, it is difficult to imagine that till 1974 Royappa, Article 14 was largely anti-arbitrariness. Anti-discrimination. Anti-discrimination. There was no anti-arbitrariness in 14. Justice Bhagwati developed it with Ashok Sen's assistance. And Royappa was the main judgment which became the basis for the Ajay Hasyas, the Maneka Gandhis, the Ramanna Shettis. Article 14, anti-arbitrary concept. Of course, as a footnote, Justice Bhagwati practiced very often, operation successful, patient died. In Ramanna and in Royappa, the poor fellow lost the case, but the law went to the stratosphere. The law was great, but the petitioner lost. Ashok Sen was, with my father, the two appellants arguing Sibia, the locus classicus on anticipatory bail. Even today, the Constitution bench, speaking to Justice Chandrachud, it remains. He established law even as a litigant. He challenged a reopening of his tax assessment as Ashok Sen versus Union of India. And the law laid down is quite good, quite seminal in those days on reason to believe. That was Ashok Sen's personal case. He was there in Sanjeev Coke. It's an anchor case on the directive principles issue, on Indian Express, on 191A, and then on the principle that you will not interfere in elections by interim orders. The major case was argued by him, Usman, in 1985, which, perhaps Justice Bagchi knows, led to an enduring friction between Justice D.A. Desai and Justice Sabyasachi Mukherjee. A very enduring and long one. As Justice Dipankar Datta recently put it, you had Palkiwala in the west and you had Ashok Sen in the east. Another wag put it that the 1960s law reports are replete with B Sen, the 70s and 80s with A Sen. Thank you very much.